was a mother-in-law, and she knocked on the door, and her son-in-law opens it, and she says, "Hi, Gabe, I'm here for a visit." And Gabe says, "That's cool. How long are you here for?" And she says, "I don't know, as long as you want me to." And Gabe says, "Well, you mean you won't even stay for a cup of tea?" Visiting with folks, having dinner with folks, it's what we do with family. I have mine coming over tonight. It's what we do with friends and with neighbors and with church folk. We like to have dinners here, I've heard. It's not necessarily something you look forward to with somebody that you really don't like. In fact, if all of us were honest, we might have a few people that we prefer not to have dinner with. Don't look at them now. Even if we don't have a list of names, sometimes if we're being really honest, we'll have a list of people, a group of people that we'd prefer not to invite over to the house, not to invite over for a meal. In the Hindu religion, they have something known as a caste system, and it's a very definite way of segregating people. And it is segregated along the lines of the family that you were born into. And in the past, not so much now, but in the past, it permeated the culture and gave a definition to whom you could associate with. The lowest caste is called the untouchables, or the Dalit. And in the past, these people were so segregated, they had to live outside of town. In the hamlets, outside of towns and villages, they were absolutely forbidden entry to any of the temples, to most schools. They couldn't even draw water from the same wells as the higher caste people. And their touch was seen as seriously polluting to those of a higher caste. And they would have had, the people they were touching, would have had to have a remedial cleansing. In southern India, even if you came within sight of one of these untouchables, you were forced to go and have a cleansing. So a lot of these untouchables, these Dalit, would only move about at night. Lest you think that that religion is unique, in our Bibles, we can find similar restrictions placed on different groups of people depending on their ethnic origin or their work that they did, or sometimes even their gender. Jews in Jesus' day envisioned that each type of people had a higher rung on a ladder, and it led up to God. So the lowest, they couldn't get any further. And we saw it reflected in who was allowed into the temple. The Jews said that Gentiles, anyone that weren't like them, they were relegated outside into the courts of the Gentile. And there was an actual wall separating them from the next group, which were the women. And then the next group after that were the Jewish men, and there was variations within that. And the next level were the priests. And they were allowed to go into the temple, but not into the highest, most sacred place. That was reserved for one, the high priest only, and only on one day, Yom Kippur. The legalistic Pharisees of the times, they were absolutely adamant that you stayed within your level, that you made sure that you weren't associating with those of a lower level. This segregation was very definite, was very rigid, was very adhered to. And if you belonged to a group that was considered unclean, even if you were Jewish, such as shepherds or those with the skin disease like leprosy we hear a lot of, even if you had touched a forbidden food or had been associated with someone who was unclean or unacceptable, you had to be ritually cleansed or purified before you could be admitted to the temple again. Purification always had a waiting period associated with it. If it was a minor infraction, well, you could wait until evening of the next day. That's for minor cases. But you could wait up to 80 days to be ritually cleansed if you gave birth to a daughter. This ritual washing, ritual cleansing involved sacrifices. It involved priestly rituals, which then had to be paid for. And this all carried over into the way that people who were unacceptable or unclean or unsavory were treated in society as a whole. In our reading today, we heard that Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors. Isn't it interesting that they divided out sinners and tax collectors? They had their own special group. Sinners, someone who was unacceptable to the religious authority. Having dinner with them meant that you wouldn't be welcome at the synagogue. For how long? Well, that was dependent on the priests. And so the question that was asked, why does your teacher eat with sinners and tax collectors, wouldn't have been an unusual one. In fact, it had ramifications. So why would someone choose to eat with them, to have dinner with these sinners and these tax collectors? Better to avoid them. Better yet, just shun them. But what does Jesus do? He seeks them out. He goes looking for them, and he invites himself to dinner. We have talked about Jesus as being the happy, friendly, white bread Jesus image that we've had. And we've talked about the Jesus who sees things in a different way, maybe an inside-out, upside-down way. Here we see Jesus as the rebel, as the revolutionary. This Jesus had absolutely no qualms about associating with sinners, with Samaritans, with women, with children. He actively sought out and touched those with leprosy, those who were deformed, those who had a mental illness, those that were so unclean that it would have taken days before you could go back to the temple. He invited himself to dinner with tax collectors, these people who actively persecuted the Jewish people by charging exorbitant taxes. Incidentally, the tax collectors were particularly frowned upon by the Pharisees and religious leaders because they realized the more tax that was collected by the Roman tax collectors, the less there would be for the coffers at the temple. This society frowned upon women. They were a second-class citizen, but Jesus actively admitted women into his inner circle and encouraged them. In a religious society that not only ostracized women, but in those days at every synagogue, at every service, Jewish men prayed. Are you ready for this? "Blessed art thou, O Lord, who hast not made me a woman." Okay, I might respond by saying, okay, I'm really glad that happened too. Jesus made a point of defying convention, of challenging the status quo. He was intentional in the way he chose to break down societal barriers and upset the religious leaders. I imagine he might have just thumbed his nose at them. He actively worked and moved to include everyone. He lit a fire under his disciples to do the same, quite literally, In our passage today, we hear that even after Jesus ascended into heaven, the Holy Spirit that he promised would come, comes among them and touch them with tongues of fire. This fire that made them inclusive, by giving them the ability to speak in the languages around them. God, Jesus, the Spirit compelled them to be among the people that they might not associate with on a regular basis. We, as Christ followers, are called to do the same. And before you say, oh yeah, I do that, we do that, it's all good, I want you to think about that. Just as I started, if we are being brutally honest, would we have certain people or groups of people that we prefer not to invite to our homes for dinner? Criminals, drug addicts, prostitutes, homeless people, they might spring immediately to mind. Or maybe your list includes drunks, or conceited people, or hypocritical people, or politicians. Drunks, those people who surrounded these disciples on Pentecost, they thought they were drunk because they were talking gibberish at 9 in the morning. They were judging them by what they heard and what they saw. Or maybe if you're being really honest in your heart of hearts, but you'd never say it out loud, your list includes Muslims, or immigrants, or a transsexual person. And our churches, if we're still being honest, tend to be like the people who are in them. That's you and me. And while we may not say that all of these people are not welcome, our language and our actions say a lot. Even the very homogeneous nature of the people who are in our churches is very off-putting to those who would walk in our doors. They wouldn't be comfortable. I have to tell you a story about when I was preaching as a student. I was in a church in Hamilton, which shall remain nameless. And when I arrived that morning, they told me about Mary. Mary was a homeless person who quite frequently would come in. The Good Shepherd was right across the street. And she would come into the church on Sunday morning, and Mary would just wander about. She wouldn't necessarily sit for very long, but they were really concerned that I would be upset or thrown off my game by this person who was unkempt and unusual and not doing the same thing that they were doing. And I said, don't worry, nothing phases me, it's all good. Well, Mary did. She came and she went, and she had her things and she had her blanket. And just before the sermon was going to start, Mary came and she sat right in the front seat, and she took her blanket and she laid it out across the back, and she laid down and wrapped herself up in it and listened quietly to the sermon. And after the sermon, there was a song. And it was the custom in this church for the minister to sit in the same front seat. So I went and I sat by Mary, and we stood up and we sang this song, and I honestly don't remember what it was, but it was a bit of a peppy song. And Mary was dancing like I sometimes do. And I guess she turned around and saw someone frowning at her for dancing. And she just went. I thought, yes, Mary. Our attitudes say a whole lot more about who we are as a church if we are judging, if we are segregating, if we are not accepting everyone just as they are. Sinners, every last one of them. Sinners, every last one of us. Philip Yancey shares this incredibly sad story in his book, The Jesus I Never Knew. On my glasses. I recounted a story told me by a friend who works with the Down and Out in Chicago. A prostitute came to him in wretched straits, homeless, her health failing, unable to buy food for her 2-year-old daughter. Her eyes awash with tears, she confessed that she had been renting out her daughter, 2 years old, to men interested in kinky sex in order to support her own drug habit. My friend could hardly bear hearing the sordid details of her stories. He sat in silence, not knowing what to say. At last he asked her if she had ever thought of going to a church for help. I will never forget the look of pure astonishment that crossed her face, he told me. Church, she cried. Why would I ever go there? They would just make me feel even worse than I already do. Would someone say that about us? Would that woman be welcome here? Would that homeless Mary be welcome here if she walked in our doors? Would they look at our attitudes and find us less than hospitable, less than accepting, less than loving in the way that Jesus did? Everyone in every situation, he loved them. This rebel Jesus offers up a revolutionary way of thinking, of looking at the world, of looking at people. He offers a revolution of grace, an insurgency that has everything to do with acceptance and nothing to do with rejection. He offers us a way of looking at the world that is counterintuitive to society's values, and that's a good thing. Sitting down to dinner with sinners, that's what he offers us. This meal, this table isn't for the pretty and the perfect. It isn't for the lovely and the lovable. It isn't for those who look like us, act like us, think like us, fit into the idea of what we should be. It's for those who have been broken and bruised by the world. It's for those who have been stepping outside the confines of polite society. It's for those who have been hurt by or excluded from a church in the past. It is for those who have felt judged, who have been judged, those that we might consider sinners. In short, it's for all of us. Every last one of us is welcome to eat at the table of this revolutionary Jesus, this rebel who says to us, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners. This Jesus, this rebel Jesus who says, I have come to eat with not the righteous, but sinners. Me too. Anyone ready to eat? Amen. Let's sing together.